The story began not in Moscow, nor in Washington, but in a forgotten basement of a KGB archive facility on the outskirts of Minsk. The building had once been a wartime bomb shelter, its walls thick and damp, its corridors echoing with every step. It was here, in the spring of 1983, that a young KGB archivist named Dmitry Sokolov was assigned to sort through dozens of crates containing old intelligence materials, transferred from various regional directorates. Most of the documents were mundane, intercepted letters, surveillance photos, outdated reports. But at the bottom of one crate, wrapped in a faded cloth and sealed with wax that had long since cracked, Dmitry found a leather-bound folder marked only with a single handwritten code, A217. When he opened the folder, he immediately sensed something unusual. The paper inside was not Soviet-made. The texture, color, and watermark indicated Western origin. The ink had faded, but the typeface was unmistakably American. As he carefully spread the pages on the table, he realized he was holding something that should not have been here at all. An internal CIA memorandum, dated 1958, stamped top secret, eyes only. The first page alone was enough to make Dmitry's pulse quicken. It described an operation the CIA had contemplated but never executed, involving covert penetration of the Soviet nuclear command structure. The memo outlined technical vulnerabilities, communication gaps, and even the names of two Soviet officers suspected of being susceptible to recruitment. But what disturbed him most was a short, cryptic paragraph on the second page, something the CIA clearly feared, something they believed could destabilize the entire balance of power if the Soviets ever learned it. The paragraph referenced a project codenamed Silent Verdict, a clandestine analytical program within the CIA's Directorate of Intelligence. According to the memo, the project's central output was a comprehensive assessment of how the Soviet Union would react under a specific extreme scenario. 1. The CIA openly admitted would be catastrophic if Moscow ever learned the truth of it. What exactly the scenario was remained unclear. The text was partially redacted, and the following page, the one containing the full explanation, was missing entirely. Dmitry knew immediately that this discovery was not an accident. Documents like this did not simply end up forgotten in an archive box. Someone had placed it here deliberately decades ago, hidden in plain sight. And the missing page suggested that either the KGB or the CIA had removed it long before he found the file. He reported his discovery to his superior, Colonel Sushkevich. Within 24 hours, the document was flown to Moscow, hand-delivered to the first chief directorate. And by the end of the week, every high-ranking KGB officer knew one thing. They had stumbled upon something the CIA never wanted the Soviet Union to see. The KGB's first chief directorate treated the A2117 folder like a live explosive. Only a handful of officers were permitted to view it, each required to sign a secrecy protocol more restrictive than anything used in standard counterintelligence. Among them was Major General Viktor Mikhailovich Orlov, a veteran of numerous deep-cover operations against the West. He had seen enough classified American material to instantly recognize what made this document different. It wasn't just a leaked report or a stolen cable. It was something the CIA itself seemed terrified to acknowledge. Orlov gathered a small analytical team in a secure underground briefing room beneath the Lubyanka. The lights hummed coldly overhead as he placed the leather folder on the center table. Every man in the room knew that whatever was written inside had the potential to expose decades of American strategic thinking. But one problem overshadowed everything: the missing page. The second half of the silent verdict paragraph ended abruptly mid-sentence. The torn edge suggested intentional removal, not deterioration. And since the CIA memo was dated 1958, it meant the page had been missing for at least 25 years. Orlov instructed the analyst to reconstruct the context. They worked for hours, examining every sentence, every redaction, every faint indentation on the paper. Some markings suggested that multiple copies of the memo had existed. A few impressions hinted at handwritten annotations, erased or rubbed off. One analyst proposed that the missing page might have contained political directives. Another believed it could have detailed operational instructions. But Orlov disagreed. "This isn't about an operation," he said quietly, leaning over the document. "This is about fear. Their fear. Whatever they removed wasn't about something they planned to do. It was about something they discovered." The room fell silent. To understand the memo, the KGB needed its origin. So Orlov ordered an exhaustive search of all Soviet intelligence captures from the late 1950s. Within 48 hours, archivists delivered two relevant files: fragments of intercepted American communications, and a partial transcript from a CIA briefing that Soviet agents had recorded through a bug planted in the U.S. Embassy in Warsaw. The transcript was nearly incomprehensible, static, incomplete sentences, and overlapping voices, but one phrase kept repeating: scenario collapse model. The analysts recognized the term immediately. It referred to a worst-case projection used by Western intelligence agencies to predict how political systems might fracture under certain pressures. If Silent Verdict was based on such a model, then the missing page might have outlined a theoretical event that the CIA believed could cause the Soviet Union to implode, or something that could force the US into a catastrophic miscalculation. But the real breakthrough came from a completely unexpected direction. A young linguist named Pavel, while examining the memo's margins under ultraviolet light, noticed faint English handwriting, barely visible, certainly not part of the original printing. The handwriting consisted of 2 short words, scrawled in haste. Not stable. No context, no explanation. But the placement, right beside the silent verdict paragraph, made the meaning unavoidable. Someone within the CIA had read this and panicked enough to make a personal note. Someone believed the scenario outlined in the missing page threatened the stability of something crucial. The question was, stability of what? The Soviet system? The American system? The nuclear balance? Or something far more delicate? Orlov realized they needed more. The answer wasn't in the memo. It was in whoever had originally smuggled it into Soviet possession. Someone inside the CIA had leaked it. Someone who, in 1958, had risked everything to get this single document across the Iron Curtain. The KGB now had 2 missions: find the missing page and identify the traitor who had given them the rest. Both tasks would lead them into the deepest shadows of the Cold War, where deception had no borders and truth was a weapon few could afford to wield. The breakthrough came from a dusty personnel ledger buried deep in the KGB's Foreign Operations Archive. It listed every known or suspected American intelligence officer who had been active in Europe in the late 1950s. Most of the names were irrelevant, long since retired or confirmed loyal to the United States. But one entry stood out, not because of what it contained, but because of what it didn't. The name was Richard Hall, a mid-level CIA analyst, assigned to the Directorate of Intelligence from 1956 to 1960. His file was unusually thin. No disciplinary notes, no commendations, and almost no personal details. Yet the KGB's index system placed his file among those categorized as anomalous, a designation for individuals whose histories contained unexplained gaps. Hall's record contained a 3-month period in 1958 during which he was officially marked as on leave. No location, no medical notation, no foreign travel logs, nothing. This was extraordinary. In the CIA of the Cold War, analysts did not simply vanish from their official timelines. Orlov ordered a deep dive into Hall's background. The KGB's American division activated old contacts in East Germany, Poland, and neutral Austria, anyone who might have encountered a wandering American intelligence officer in 1958. At first, the search produced nothing. But then an unexpected lead emerged from a file in Dresden, an East German Stasi surveillance report describing a foreign man who had crossed into East Berlin from checkpoint, Charlie, carrying a small leather briefcase and behaving nervously. The man had been tailed for 40 minutes before disappearing near Friedrichstraße Station. The physical description matched Hall almost perfectly. The Stasi report contained one more detail. The briefcase had a distinctive scratch in the shape of a diagonal cross. When Orlov heard this, he looked immediately at the A217 folder on the table in front of him. The diagonal scratch on its cover, faint but unmistakable, had puzzled him since the day it arrived from Minsk. He now knew why. Someone had carried the CIA memo across the border, hidden in that briefcase. Someone who had feared being caught so much that they removed the most explosive page before, delivering the rest to a Soviet contact. But why remove only one page? Why not destroy the entire memo? The analysts debated dozens of possibilities. Some believed Hall was a Soviet sympathizer. Others insisted he was acting on his own fear of American policy. Still others entertained the possibility that he had been blackmailed. But the truth began to emerge when they found Hall's final CIA performance review from 1960, a single sentence that revealed everything. Subject exhibits persistent concern over catastrophic systems-level miscalculations. In intelligence language, this was a red flag. It meant Hall had begun privately questioning the stability of American strategic planning, specifically nuclear planning. The memo he leaked and the missing silent verdict page were almost certainly tied to America's early nuclear retaliation models. The KGB was beginning to see the outline of something immense. If the missing page contained analysis showing that U.S. nuclear decision-making was based on flawed assumptions, or worse, projections that could trigger an accidental war, then Hall's actions made sense. He hadn't been betraying his country. He had been trying to prevent a catastrophe. Orlov stared at the remaining pages of the memo. So much thought had gone into it, and so much fear. But without the missing page, everything was speculation. They needed proof. That proof arrived in the form of a message from the KGB. Residentura in New York. A source inside the United Nations, known only as Vector, claimed he had information about an American intelligence officer who had confessed to losing something dangerous shortly before disappearing forever. The KGB prepared a covert retrieval operation. If Vector knew what Hall had leaked, or what the missing page contained, it could finally reveal the truth behind Silent Verdict, and it could expose the secret the CIA feared more than anything else. The KGB's New York Residentura operated from the shadows of Midtown, hidden behind layers of front companies and quiet apartments rented under false identities. From this subterranean network emerged the message from Vector, a long-trusted informant whose access to American diplomats had provided Moscow with valuable insights for nearly a decade. But this time was different. Vector's tone was urgent, almost panicked. He insisted that what he had learned about Richard Hall was not intelligence, but a warning. 2 days later, under cover of a routine courier exchange, a KGB officer disguised as a visiting trade representative met Vector in a dimly lit hallway beneath the United Nations building. The meeting lasted only 6 minutes. No documents exchanged hands, no recordings were made. But the information that Vector whispered in that short span stunned the KGB leadership when it reached Moscow. According to Vector, Hall had confided to a fellow analyst in early 1959 that he had destroyed something that could end the world if misunderstood. The colleague dismissed it as paranoia. Hall had been known to fixate on nuclear protocols and worst-case scenarios. But Vector said Hall's final weeks in the CIA were marked by isolation, fear, and repeated statements that Washington is building strategy on a broken foundation. Days later, Hall vanished from the agency without explanation, officially resigning for personal health reasons. He never resurfaced in public records again. What did he mean by broken foundation? What had terrified him so profoundly? The answer arrived through another channel. A defector from the American defense industry who had sought asylum in Prague in 1962. His debriefing files, previously considered unimportant, described a controversial internal CIA project from the 1950s that attempted to simulate the Soviet reaction to various nuclear strike scenarios. The program had been shelved due to unreliable variables, but one name repeatedly appeared in the margins: Silent Verdict. General Orlov ordered all available data on the project compiled into a single classified report. For 3 days and 3 nights, the team in Lubyanka pored over scraps of information, fragments of briefings, mentions in secondary documents, and handwritten notes from American analysts who had participated in the early simulations. Slowly, the outline of the missing page began to emerge. Silent Verdict was not merely a projection of Soviet behavior. It was a projection of American behavior under extreme conditions. The CIA, fearing flawed Soviet assumptions, had begun to suspect that their own models were just as flawed, possibly more so. The project aimed to test one terrifying possibility. Could the United States accidentally initiate nuclear war based on misinterpreted According to one reconstructed memo, the projected probability of misinterpretation during a particular Soviet alert cycle exceeded 40%. In other words, under certain conditions, American command might interpret routine Soviet military exercises as signs of an imminent nuclear strike and trigger a preemptive attack. This was the horror Hall had discovered. The missing page, according to all indicators, contained the detailed scenario in which American decision-makers would order a retaliatory launch based on faulty assumptions. The consequences of such a scenario were clear: the destruction of both nations, triggered not by aggression, but by a computational error. Orlov felt a chill. Silent Verdict wasn't a plan. It was a confession. A confession that the balance of terror between the superpowers was far more unstable than either side had ever admitted. But one question remained unanswered. If Hall had feared this scenario so much, why had he leaked only part of the document? And where was the missing page now? The answer came unexpectedly from an aging officer in the KGB's own ranks, a man who had been Stationed in East Berlin in 1958, the same year, Hall crossed into the Eastern Bloc. He claimed that Hall had not simply handed over the memo and fled. Instead, Hall had insisted that the most dangerous part, the missing page, be hidden somewhere safe, somewhere even the KGB couldn't easily access. And before disappearing forever, Hall had delivered a final message. If the wrong people read it, they will use it, not prevent it. Orlov understood instantly. The missing page wasn't lost. It was deliberately hidden, and it contained a scenario so explosive that Hall believed neither superpower should possess it. Now the KGB had a new mission: find the page before the CIA did. Because if the Americans recovered it first, they would bury the truth forever. The hunt for the missing page became the most secretive internal operation the KGB had undertaken in years. Only 7 people knew of its existence, and even fewer knew why it mattered. General Orlov understood that what they were searching for was not simply a piece of paper. It was a potential trigger point for global catastrophe, a key to the darkest corners of American nuclear doctrine. But the strangest part was this: the KGB was no longer sure they even wanted to find it. Orlov began by retracing every step of Richard Hall's known movements in 1958 with help from East German archives. They reconstructed Hall's 3-day stay in East Berlin. He had spent hours walking aimlessly, circling blocks, riding the U-Bahn without purpose. It was behavior consistent with a man trying to shake surveillance, or a man wrestling with a decision that terrified him. On the evening of his disappearance from Stasi surveillance, Hall had visited an abandoned church near Friedrichstrasse. The church had been partly destroyed during the war and was used intermittently by locals for storage. Records from that night indicated nothing unusual, but when KGB agents returned to the site in 1983, they discovered something the Stasi hadn't: a small loose stone in the church's foundation that concealed a hollow space. Inside it, wrapped in brittle cloth, they found a metal tube sealed with wax. The tube was empty. Hall had hidden something there, and someone else had taken it. The question was, who? The KGB's search broadened. They dug into old surveillance logs, interrogated former Stasi officers, reviewed years of border-crossing records, and then they found it: a single Stasi report describing an unidentified man spotted leaving the church minutes after Hall had last been seen in the area. The description didn't match Hall. It didn't match any American known to be in East Berlin at the time. But it matched someone else perfectly. Someone the CIA had never acknowledged publicly. Someone whose existence was still classified in 1983. A man known only by his codename, Gray Fox. Gray Fox was a CIA counterintelligence operative deployed in Europe during the 1950s. His mission: intercept leaks before they crossed into Soviet hands. He rarely appeared in official records because his operations were too sensitive, and because he answered only to the highest levels of Langley. According to limited intelligence the KGB had gathered, Gray Fox specialized in hunting traitors inside the CIA and containing the damage they caused. It was now clear what had happened. Hall had hidden the missing page inside the church. Gray Fox had found it first, and the CIA had covered up the entire incident to avoid revealing the truth behind. Silent verdict. But something didn't fit. If the CIA had recovered the missing page decades ago, why had they allowed the rest of the memo to disappear? Why hadn't they sealed every trace of silent verdict? Why had they seemed so afraid of the document resurfacing? Even without the final page, Orlov's team began searching for signs of internal turmoil inside the CIA after 1958, and they found exactly what they feared. According to declassified diplomatic logs, the agency had endured a quiet but severe internal crisis in 1959, triggered by what was described cryptically as a systems-level assessment failure. No details were provided, but the timing matched perfectly with Hall's disappearance. It became clear that the missing page had triggered something inside the CIA, something so consequential that they had buried an entire analytical division afterward. When Orlov presented the final findings to the KGB leadership, the room fell silent. The truth was stark and terrifying. The CIA's silent verdict scenario had revealed that under a specific chain of misinterpretations, the United States could be the first to launch nuclear weapons, entirely by mistake. A perfect storm of technical errors, psychological assumptions, and flawed intelligence models could push American command to believe an attack was imminent when none existed. This was the scenario Hall had tried to prevent. This was the secret the CIA feared the most. And this was why the missing page had been hidden. Not to protect America from the Soviets, but to protect the world from America. What happened to the missing page next remained a mystery. Some believed Grey Fox had destroyed it. Others believed he had locked it away in a black vault deep beneath Langley. A few in the KGB even whispered that Hall had made a second copy and hidden it elsewhere. A fail-safe for the future. But Orlov understood something deeper. The missing page didn't need to be found. Its implications were already clear. The danger was not in the document itself, but in the system that had allowed such a scenario to exist. He placed the A217 folder back into its protective case and locked it away, deep in the KGB archives, not to bury the truth, but to ensure that when history looked back on this moment, it would understand one thing. In the Cold War, neither side feared the other as much as they feared their own mistakes. And somewhere in America, buried in a classified vault, the missing page still waited. Silent verdict on the fragility of human judgment in a world ruled by shadows and split-second decisions.